Welcome to Jerry Recaps. The story continues. Seeing Hargan's face, a man that was following him asked, "What are you finding so amusing?" "There's a guy that I want to recruit no matter what," Hargan spoke. "Is it Kim YuWon?" the guy said with a pleasant smile. It was Lee Sung-yoon, the newest participant to join Hargan's team. He was capable of controlling mana. "Do you know him?" Now that he thought about it, he realized that Kim YuWon and Lee Sung-yoon were from the same world. Their names were similar, and the fact that they both had talent was also similar. Sung-yoon replied while shrugging his shoulders, "Not likely. I think he's from the same country as me, but I've never heard of him. I just knew who you were talking about as soon as I saw the updated ranking. At this rate, he might overtake your spot, sir. The gap in CP between you and him is shrinking fast." Lee Sung-yoon spoke. "Well, that's because of you guys," Hargan said while looking back at the comrades following behind him. Paladin, Elada Yolch, Lee Sung-yoon, and 5 others. A total of 9 people formed a line behind Hargan. On the first day, Hargan's focus wasn't on hunting. It was on gathering good comrades and forming a team. And he wanted to raise that team so they could climb the tower together. This is a pretty good team, thought Hargan. He had taken a big liking to the group he had formed. They were each highly skilled, and their levels were pretty high. There's only one spot left. Hargan wanted to find exactly 10 comrades during the final tutorial, and one of those spots was already reserved for someone. So his name is Kim YuWon. Hargan resolved to not let him go next time. "The real hunt starts now," declared Hargan. Hargan was lost in thought after checking the rankings when he was interrupted by a stoic male voice. "Ajusi. That's it, right? Hey, I told you. I'm not an Ajusi." Hargan looked towards the voice with a ticked-off expression. Paladin, an elf participant, was standing off to the side, pointing towards a hole in the middle of the forest. Hargan knew it was somewhere around here, but it took them half a day to find it, and without Paladin's help, it might have taken them days to find it. "Okay, now let's see," said Hargan. He slammed his 2 fists together and spoke, "Everyone stand back to not get shocked." The rest of his team spread out so they wouldn't get caught in the shockwave. Wearing golden gloves, Hargan tightly clenched his fists, raising them up high in the air. And then, Hargan pounded the earth, and the ground gave way. Within the crumbled ground, a huge hole opened up. Hargan smiled as he exclaimed, "I found it. Is this it? The place you've been trying so hard to find?" Lee Sung-yoon spoke. "If it were not for Paladin, it would have taken much longer. Everyone let all go in." Hargan spoke. The electricity around Hargan's hands lit up the inside of the hole. Without hesitation, he threw himself down the hole, slowing his descent by scraping the walls with his hands. At the bottom of the hole, the ceiling was covered in bright stones. "It looks very spacious. It looks like a cave." Hargan's teammates followed him into the hole and looked around the cave. They had thought it was just a large island. They didn't expect there to be a place like this. Having found an entrance, Paladin ordered his spirits to scout around. He then looked back at Hargan. "We should first scout it out before we start moving." "Ajusi, what's wrong?" Hargan, who was smiling widely when they first entered, now looked stoic. He didn't answer Paladin's question because something was really off. That's odd. He was sure that a message should have popped up. He waited for the message, but there was nothing but silence. He tried listening closer, but there was still nothing. That could only mean one thing. Did someone already find this place? There were no signs of someone having already entered through the entrance they had found, but there was more than a single entrance to this dungeon. But to have already found this place when it's only been a few days. "Captain?" shouted Sung-yoon. "The rankings. Please check the rankings." "The rankings?" At first, Hargan was confused, but then his eyes widened. He immediately checked the rankings. Kim YuWon had reached first place. He was able to see that within that short time, their positions had flipped. A volley of electric attacks exploded, shaking the cave. The centipede-like monsters that had appeared out of nowhere were blown up and shredded in an instant. Afterward, many other centipede monsters also got shredded instantly. Hargan punched the air, and once again the sound of thunder echoed through the cave, shaking the earth. He seems pretty pissed. Paladin and Elada walked together, arm in arm, watching the electric attacks fly out from Hargan. His physical abilities and electric attacks were truly terrifying. Despite not being the target of his attacks, they could still feel light shocks. "He seems less pissed and just really motivated to me," said Sungyun. Elada tilted her head after hearing Sungyun's words. She stared at him intensely, her blue eyes juxtaposing her gray skin. "Do you think it's a rivalry?" Eleanor was an elf. And on top of that, she was a biracial child between a fair-skinned elf and a dark elf. "Yeah, something like that." Sungyun tried to calm down his heart. Whenever he got to see her face up close, his heart started beating like a drum. With Elada's clear skin devoid of any imperfection, exotic blue eyes, and long ears, Sungyun thought she was more beautiful than any woman he could ever imagine. "But we won't be able to hunt properly like this," said Yolch. She was a woman that kept her eyes closed, and had long black hair that reached her waist. She was a pureblood like Hargan, and she was a mercenary from a clan that specialized in magic. As she was the second strongest person on the team after Hargan. Sungyun and the rest of the team nodded their heads in agreement. Regardless of the motivation, a normal hunt couldn't happen while Hargan discriminately killed all the monsters by himself. "Let's split the team in half," suggested Hargan. After quickly finishing his hunt, he spoke while wiping the sweat on his forehead with the back of his hand. "Elada and Paladin can lead the way for each group and also keep us in contact with each other. Yolch, Sungyun, Elada, Fail, and Typhoon." The members that Hargan named looked at him as he continued. "Since we're at a crossroads, you guys go right. Do you really think the 5 of them will be okay by themselves?" asked Paladin. Hargan responded, "They'll have Yolch." "That's true," answered Paladin, while looking at Yolch, who was already headed down the right path. Yolch and the others went down the path on the right and started hunting. Even though they no longer had Hargan, they were able to hunt without any issues. Sungyun raised his hand, mana started condensing. Yolch and Elada had bought time for Sungyun to prepare a big attack. It was the skill Mana Blast. Dozens of centipedes cried simultaneously showed up, and Sungyun pointed the palm of his hand at them. "Please get out of the way." The Mana Blast wiped out the entire area, blowing up the centipedes to smithereens. It took a lot of mana to use, but its power more than made up for it. In an instant, the pack of centipedes had been decimated, and Sungyun let out a deep breath. At first, the hunt progressed smoothly. The group used the same method to hunt for hours. However, as time went on, the number of the centipede-like monsters increased, and the number of legs they had also increased. Yolch. "They're targeting the rear." Up until now, Yolch had been holding back in order to not get caught up in Hargan's electric attacks. She finally unsheathed her 2 swords and weaved in between the monsters, killing dozens of them in an instant. After they finished slaying the monsters, there were monsters' bodies everywhere with their blood and poison spilled all around. "Good job. Let's keep going like this." Currently, 3 shots were the max number of mana blasts he was capable of firing. Since he just fired one off, he now had to start conserving his mana. "What's that door over there?" "It's massive." Beyond the horde of centipedes, a 5-meter-tall, giant steel door could be seen. It was the first door that had appeared after half a day in the dungeon. "Maybe it's like a boss room." "Boss room?" Eleanor asked. "It's similar to a game. So, I've experienced a dungeon similar to this before, and there was always a boss inside doors like that." Sungyun was recollecting a video game he played long ago, but Yolch ended up thinking that he must have been a mercenary like her, if not an adventurer, which changed her opinion of him. The group decided to take a short break. don't get too relaxed just because we finished hunting. You're usually closest to death when lowering your guard. Sung-yoon gathered his breath, focusing on recovering his mana, but he also continuously checked the rankings. Sung-yoon felt that the ranking was something off. I don't think it's gone up for a while now. While checking the rankings, Sung-yoon's eyes widened. Seeing the sudden change in his expression, Yulch asked, "What's wrong?" "The rankings," he instantly mumbled. The ground of the cave started shaking. It was a tremor that felt like something heavy had just dropped. "What's going on?" "I think it's coming from that side." The group stopped their break and started moving once again. The shock had definitely originated from inside the doors. "Everyone, raise your guard." And Sung-yoon, "Go to the back and hold your position," directed Yulch. Sung-yoon nodded at her orders. He had a hunch that this tremor wasn't unrelated to the CP rankings he had just seen. "Don't tell me that he is inside," Sung-yoon thought. "You have entered the boss's room," the system notified. "The boss room has been cleared." "What is this? Who in the world?" They were shocked from seeing the state of the boss room, which was honestly a normal reaction. There were hundreds of dead centipede monsters, not to mention the corpse of the giant boss that resembled a dragon. The room was nothing but full of surprises. As Sung-yoon looked in front, he knew that it was Kim YuWon. The points of YuWon started rising in the rankings. Finally, as he looked, he saw a figure sitting in front of a monster corpse, and also Kim YuWon's points increased up to 10,000. YuWon's cinder eyes flashed as he looked at the group who just entered the room. Previously, when YuWon entered the boss room, he attacked the boss monster right away, slaying it with all the skills he had. The monster with hundreds of legs was commonly referred to as a parasite dragon in the tower. And despite its insect-like appearance, it was very hard to kill. Because of that, it took YuWon almost 30 minutes to defeat it. The boss of the dungeon collapsed. YuWon, who was riding on top of it, showed his distaste. It was so hard. Still, thanks to that, he was able to level up. YuWon level increased. Along with the level, his strength, agility, and magic power also increased by 1. I'll have to be careful using gigantification. The mana consumption aside, it's too straining on my body with my current constitution. YuWon had gained a lot from defeating this boss. On top of leveling up, he was able to go all out with his arsenal of skills, letting him get a proper grasp of his current fighting power. YuWon obtained 3,000 points after defeating the boss. The Heaven-Slaying Star completion rate also increased by 1%. This should do it. Having defeated the parasite dragon, he had fulfilled his second objective for this dungeon. And on top of that, this was an unexpected bonus. To get only 1% from defeating such a tough boss. However, this was the first time Heaven-Slaying Star's completion rate increased so much. Does the completion rate go up faster if I kill higher class monsters? YuWon was sure now that it wasn't just about how many monsters he killed. The completion rate is going up very slowly. I wonder if I have to focus on killing bosses in order for me to properly complete this skill. Except for the initial stat boost it gave, the Heaven-Slaying Star hadn't demonstrated any effects. One thing's for sure, I have to complete the skill to see its full effect. YuWon sat down on top of the giant centipede's corpse and started massaging his right arm. Seeing as how he needed more constitution, he couldn't help but appreciate a skill that would raise his stats. From the opposite side of the room that YuWon entered, the steel door opened, and a group of participants came in. What was awaiting the group that entered the depths of the dungeon was a mountain of centipede corpses, as well as the corpse of the boss that was dozens of meters long. You guys were a bit late. And at the top of all those corpses, I just killed this guy. Did you kill all of them by yourself? Everyone in the party tensed up, preparing for a fight. It was unavoidable that they found YuWon a threat when he cleared a boss room by himself. Could the captain also do this? Sung-yoon thought while looking around at the monster corpses in the room. Shrouding himself in golden electricity, Hargan was capable of killing a dozen monsters with a single punch. However, the doubt still lingered in Sungyun's mind. Would Hargan also have been able to clear the boss's room by himself? That mark, thought Sungyun, noticing a huge hole in the ground. He was puzzled. How were these the skills of a participant who grew up in the same world and went through the same tutorials as him? Sungyun gulped. The man standing in front of him was a wild beast. Are you perhaps Kim YuWon? Asked Sungyun, remembering how YuWon's CP had shot up just a moment ago. YuWon nodded his head. There was no reason for him to keep it a secret. Do you have any party members? I'm alone, as you can see. Hearing YuWon's answer, Sungyun finally understood why Hargan wanted him so badly. At first, Sungyun couldn't believe it. How could someone from the same world as him hold as much power as Hargan? And after joining Hargan's party and hearing about his life, Sungyun became even more skeptical that YuWon's skills were on par with Hargan's. However, it was true, though, Sungyun. And he wondered what might happen if YuWon joined their team. Would you like to join our team? Asked Sungyun. YuWon noticed, is that Lee Sungyun? YuWon squinted his eyes, observing each of them. There were some familiar faces. Isn't that Alada? She's usually with Paladin. Seeing as how Paladin wasn't with them, YuWon decided that Hargan probably split up the team, for now, to hunt more efficiently. And that guy? Could she be Yolch, the next in ranking after Hargan? If she managed to get there, she is pretty strong. They were all fairly high-ranked participants. For them to be in a team together. It was an interesting party. These guys all have pretty strong mental fortitudes. YuWon looked at them like an adult looking at children that were growing up big and strong. So these are the guys that Hargan gathered? Not bad. The group looked silently at him, waiting for a response to Sungyun's offer. YuWon was appreciative of the offer, but his mind was already made up. I'll have to say no. I knew it. Sungyun slowly shook his head, having expected this response. YuWon was already powerful enough that he didn't need a team. While Sungyun was contemplating by himself, Yolch approached YuWon and asked, "Does that mean you're planning on fighting the main boss alone?" Yolch continued speaking, "We were given a month to clear this tutorial. And we're allowed to fight the boss by combining our strengths instead of fighting it alone." YuWon nodded his head before asking, "So what's your point?" The focus of the final tutorial is teams. It's a matter of how much you can grow within the given time frame, how many comrades you can gather, and how well you can work together with them. She was right. That was the design behind his final tutorial. A boss that was impossible for a single person to defeat, a month to grow stronger, and no restrictions on the method. YuWon looked at her without saying any further. As he was about to speak, a loud noise erupted. Thunder boomed, and the ground shook lightly. Someone was headed over here. I contacted the captain. It was Alada's doing. I told him that we found Kim YuWon, and he said he'd be here right away. Sungyun was baffled by Alada's words. He had traversed such a distance in a moment. It's going to get pretty rowdy, predicted Sungyun. It was the guy that he'd been looking for all this time. There was no way the hot-headed Hargan would simply remain still. Their meeting would not be peaceful. A string of golden lightning passed by Sungyun. He was startled for a second by the light shock. Kim YuWon, a loud noise resounded in the room. Hargan jumped up high, flying straight at YuWon. I finally caught you. He leaped towards YuWon. At that moment, Hargan's vision went dark, and suddenly he was flying backward. Hargan wondered what was going on. But his train of thought was shortly interrupted by a hard impact to the head. Hargan landed deep inside the shell of the giant centipede. What had happened was that YuWon had grabbed Hargan's head, used his momentum against him, and thrown him downwards. Everything had happened in a flash, and Sungyun and the rest of the gang were speechless. They could not believe that their captain, who they believed to be the strongest, would get hit like this. YuWon acted like nothing happened and looked down at Yolch, asking, Do you guys simply desire survival? Or do you guys want to become rankers? Yolch's eyes widened. He mentioned rankers. She wondered how YuWon, who wasn't a pureblood, knew about their existence. People who prevailed through all the trials of the tower and cleared all the floors, those people were rankers. With fame, authority, and the power of eternal life, every player desired to become a ranker so they could possess any mystical item that existed within the tower. Because if that's all you guys want, you can play house elsewhere. I don't have any intention of playing along with such childish dreams. Yolch clenched their sword hard. Are you saying you're different? Asked Yolch. For someone like her who had remained in the middle floors for the longest time due to not being selected by the tower, something like becoming a ranker was nothing more than a dream. The king that led her people was a ranker that she greatly admired. But to YuWon, her dream was merely a process. If not a ranker, are you going to become a high ranker? No. Even higher, YuWon answered, pointing up with his finger. A place far higher than a ranker. The final destination that YuWon was aiming for in this life wasn't something like a ranker, a high ranker, or the top of the tower. I am going to break through the ceiling of this tower. Yolch remained silent for a while. Breaking through the ceiling of the tower? It was something she had never even imagined. What kind of nonsense is? Yolch was interrupted by Hargan, who YuWon had buried in the parasite dragon. What do you think you're doing? Hargan got up, growling like an animal and glaring at YuWon. He was baring his fangs, but he held himself back from attacking YuWon. Seeing Hargan's response, YuWon shrugged his shoulders as he said, "You were coming at me so ferociously, I thought you were attacking me. I was only trying to catch you. Anyone would get scared when a strong person like you jumps at them like that." After hearing YuWon's response, Hargan scratched his head and nodded in agreement. I guess that's true. I'm sorry. It was a surprisingly lukewarm response. YuWon had expected Hargan to react more furiously. I think you said something really fascinating. To break through the ceiling. The idea is absolutely electrifying. I heard it from my father before. That there is a greater power outside of the tower. Hargan said. From your father? You wouldn't know who he is, but he's an incredibly important person, Hargan said with a smug look on his face. It was apparent that he was immensely proud of his father, which wasn't all that surprising because his father was Zeus, the king of Olympus, and one of the highest rankers. With power that rivaled an administrator, he was one of the few beings capable of controlling the humongous tower. Kim YuWon, you refuse to join our team? You think you are too good for us. A fish can't swim with a whale, but don't think of me as just a little fish. One day, I'm going to become the king of Olympus. The person surprised by the grand declaration wasn't YuWon, but Yolch. She, like YuWon, knew the gravity the name Olympus carried. It was a faction comprised of numerous rankers and high rankers. They were godlike beings that ruled over multiple floors in the tower. And Hargan was here and now claiming he'd become their king. You got some pretty big aspirations, YuWon said, smirking. Hargan could be a pretty useful ace up his sleeve. While YuWon was lost in thought, Hargan said, If you really don't believe me, why don't I prove myself? YuWon responded with skepticism. Prove what? Let's make a bet. See who can defeat the boss first, and who racks up more CP. You're welcome to form your own team with as many people as you want. What about you guys? Our team has 9 people in total, and we won't be recruiting any more people. It was a very appealing offer. YuWon was allowed to defeat the boss with a team of dozens or even hundreds of people, but they would try to do the same with only a 9-member team. However, if I win, you need to join our team. This certainly piqued YuWon's interest. YuWon decided to take this opportunity and asked with a smug look on his face, And if I win? I'll serve you as my Hyungnim. YuWon observed Hargan, who was beaming with confidence. It didn't appear like he was joking. According to that event that YuWon remembered, Hargan had the potential to be a pretty big wildcard. YuWon knew that changing his plans wasn't necessarily a great idea, But he also thought, the future has to change. YuWon spoke his mind, that's not necessary. I don't need a little brother like you. After taking a moment to think, YuWon nodded his head. Instead, if I win, help me just once when I need it. Just once? Do you have a problem with that? No. I was just wondering if that's actually enough, but alright. I accept. As long as it's not too ridiculous of a request, I'll do anything. If you want, I'll even give you my items. Hargan was beaming with confidence. He seemed pretty certain that he would win no matter what. YuWon nodded his head in approval hearing him say items. That doesn't sound all that bad. So do we have a bet? Yeah. Awesome. Hargan couldn't stop laughing in excitement as he smashed his fists together. He seemed completely unfazed by the fact that YuWon had hit him in the head just moments ago. I'll be seeing you on the first floor, so prepare yourself, Hargan told YuWon as he turned around and walked back to his group. Watching Hargan walk away, YuWon scratched his head, having gotten an idea of how tough Hargan actually was. No wonder he was able to finish the tutorial in 10 days. Hargan was as straight as an arrow. In about a week from now, with his current team, he'd obtain enough power to defeat the boss. Alright now. You all heard that, right? Let's get a move on. We're on a tight schedule, Hargan said to his teammates, corralling them out of the boss room. After checking the time, YuWon shouted to Hargan and his team, there's no need to hurry so much. Hargan turned around in confusion. What did YuWon mean by there was no need to hurry when they just made a bet? YuWon shrugged his shoulders, explaining, check the time. The time. Hargan and his teammates were all shocked after checking the time limit for the tutorial. The time wasn't ticking down. The time won't be moving for some time. None of them saw this coming, including Hargan, who thought he had the most information as an Olympus pureblood. What was going on? YuWon, reading Hargan's face, answered the question on his mind. Baraganda isn't an island. It's a mythical beast. The tutorial was happening on the back of a giant beast as large as a small country. Hearing YuWon's response made Hargan take another look at all the corpses of the centipede-like monsters littering the ground. A thought came to Hargan's mind. Does that mean that they are parasites? They made a home inside this giant creature, and they were tormenting it by slowly sapping away its strength. Baraganda couldn't stand them anymore, which is why it decided to submerge itself, since the seawater would drown the parasites. So was this giant monster the king of these parasites, something like that? It was the one giving birth and raising more parasites. Hargan wasn't sure whether or not he should believe what YuWon was saying. It was something that not even Olympus knew about, so how did a mysterious tutorial participant know about all this? So now. YuWon smirked and nodded his head. The time limit is obsolete. If enough time passes by, the administrator or a lackey will probably intervene, since they wouldn't want the tutorial to last forever. The 5th tutorial is a fight against time. It's a matter of defeating the boss with as much time remaining as possible. So how did I defeat the boss within a week? I'm only going to say this because of the circumstances, but it actually wasn't a week. Baraganda is actually. This was the secret to how Odin was able to defeat the 5th tutorial's boss in under a week. It was all thanks to this hidden piece. Having taken a long enough break, YuWon got back up. I will become stronger in the meantime. When the timer starts, that's when I'll finish this tutorial. YuWon thought. The time limit stopped counting down. One by one, the participants of the tutorial started noticing. What's wrong with this? Is this an error? It isn't just me, right? The time's not going to just suddenly decrease all of a sudden, will it? It'll probably start working again soon. The participants went back to hunting. Within the time limit, they had to level up and gain as much CP as possible. Meanwhile, the lackeys killed the parasite dragon. No one's managed to do this since Odin. What about the administrator? Has he received the news yet? He recently got into a confrontation with Olympus. He's currently very busy because of that. The lackeys wanted to kill themselves. The mechanism they had prepared for the tutorial was defeated. Because of that, the tutorial was in a state of error, but there was no way to solve it right now. Someone, please contact the administrator. That wasn't in a place where it could be easily discovered. The lackeys were in utter chaos. They were trying their best to correct the course of the tutorial, but because of the administrator's absence, that didn't seem to be possible any time soon. And just like that, the time limit remained frozen. A loud noise shook the forest, and a flock of birds flew up into the sky to escape from the heat that had engulfed the area. A red orc had a sword stuck in its head. It was YuWon who had been fighting the red orcs. The large orc fell to the ground. Human, he killed our chief. The horde of monsters was stunned with fear. Chief! Human! He's a monster! A horde of red orcs slowly walked backward, trying to retreat. They were in fear. YuWon pulled out his sword from the orc chief's head and looked towards the horde. Who are you guys calling a monster? In the center of the burning forest, a giant, 4-meter-tall orc lay dead. And on top of that orc stood a man. Danger! Run away! The few surviving orcs started running away in a hurry. Damn! YuWon sounded his disapproval in the middle of the chaos. Normally, he would have gone after the orcs, but now wasn't the time for that. While he was hunting the red orc chief, the time limit started counting down again. It appeared that the lackeys had managed to fix the broken ecosystem of the tutorial, and this time, it would probably take more than just hunting the parasite dragon. There's no way they would just place the same broken mechanism back in. So once again, it was another race against time. I managed to earn myself about 4 days. It was actually more time than he had originally expected, which ended up being plenty of time. Now, I think it's about time I made my way. YuWon started heading toward the top of the island. At the center of the island, there was a huge mountain. The mountain peak suddenly released thunder, and the whole island was shaken under its impact. At the top of the mountain, there was a deep crater. This was a trial where you had to defeat the boss within a month and earn CP. And every skilled participant wanted to be the one to defeat it. Quite a few people are starting to show up. That's inevitable. They know that if they get left behind here, they'll lose their chance to get ahead. They're basically scarecrows. Yolch, Sungyun, and Eleanor looked at the participants that started gathering around the crater. While looking around, Sungyun was stunned. That team doesn't look half bad. Most of them gotta be at least level 20, said Sungyun. He had the highest mana sensitivity in the party. With his high arcane power, he sensed the participants around them and mumbled. A few of them seem pretty strong. They're guys that made it this far. In order to enter the tower, that's a minimum requirement. Yolch spoke. Are all the players inside the tower able to control mana? Sungyun inquired. Players can. Most people who aren't able to are residents of the tower. They are people who were born inside the tower, like me and the captain. And they become a pureblood once they are selected by the tower and receive the system's blessing. Sungyun nodded his head as he understood. Hey Nuna. Do you think that we'll be able to defeat the boss? Yolch was a pureblood just like Hargan. And thanks to her experience as a mercenary, she had met many players who had taught her a lot about the tutorial. Yolch took a second to think about Sungyun's question before shaking her head. I'm not sure. Under normal circumstances, I'd tell you that it's impossible. Yolch trailed off while speaking to look far down the trail before she continued. I can't get a proper grasp of how powerful our captain is. There was a group of 5 people walking up the mountain. That pack was led by Hargan, who stuck out with his golden blonde hair. They got here a bit late. Every minute was valuable time. I'm sure they wanted to make the most of it. I wonder what YuWon's doing right now. Who knows? Right now, he's probably Ilada, who was watching the crowd, answered Sungyun's question. Here he comes. Sungyun turned his head to look at the trail in the opposite direction, where he saw YuWon walking up the mountain. YuWon looked in front to check out the participants. They seemed to have leveled up quite a bit. YuWon could sense that Asunder and Sungyun's mana flow had changed. They must have leveled up multiple times because the flow of mana that they radiated now was much denser. They all had changed in just a few days, and Hargan, their leader, was no exception. At the top of the mountain, Hargan also spotted YuWon and started giving him a look. YuWon felt a light electric current. Hargan grinned widely, waving at YuWon. "You're finally here." It seemed that Hargan already thought he had this in the bag as he warmly greeted YuWon as if he was an old friend. Hargan walked up to YuWon and started looking around at the nearby participants in confusion. "Why is no one else with you? Have you not found a team yet?" "I don't have a team. I'm all by myself." Hargan was baffled by YuWon's ridiculous response. "Are you planning on defeating the boss by yourself?" "I mean, that's how I can get the most points. I've been told that I was crazy many times in my life, but you're on a whole other level." Hargan was overcome with greed while looking at YuWon. During the past 4 days while the time limit was frozen, he had tried his best to catch up to YuWon. However, the gap between the two had only widened. A CP difference of over 7,000. In order to flip the scoreboard, the only option Hargan had was to earn more CP in the process of defeating the boss. All in order to recruit YuWon into his team and finish the tutorial in the first place. Hargan was determined to raid the boss before YuWon no matter what. The people around them murmured, eavesdropping on YuWon and Hargan's conversation. A few of the pure-blood participants even started giving each other looks to see if anyone recognized YuWon. Soon after. "From what I heard, it seems like you don't have a team. We're actually about to start our raid." A few participants started approaching YuWon. They were reckless and daring, making an attempt at defeating the boss. But none of them appeared to be adequately skilled. "If you don't have a team, would you like to join us?" At the thought of YuWon joining a different team, Hargan started emitting electricity out of fury. He was okay with YuWon forming his own team, but his pride couldn't stand to see him join someone else's team. "How dare you weakling try?" He was Hargan's teammate. "I promised that I was only just standing here." "Really?" The participants, having already faced his wrath a few times, immediately backed off from YuWon. YuWon had been worried about getting pestered by the small fry, so he was thankful for Hargan. Thanks to Hargan clearing away the pests for him, YuWon started making way. As YuWon walked away from him, Hargan stopped gathering electricity in the palm of his hand. After realizing that YuWon was headed toward the boss's crater, he asked, "Are you going for it right away?" "Well, time inside the tutorial is more valuable than gold." YuWon was right. Hargan nodded his head in agreement, and started walking right beside YuWon. Then Asunder and her brother, as well as the rest of his team, started following Hargan. To try and clear the tutorial in 5 days. This is very exciting. YuWon was finally right in front of the crater. "Let's go together." And as soon as he took a step into it, his body was sucked into the deep crater. YuWon slammed into the ground, and the ground underneath him shattered. He finally entered the number 1 boss room. A large, deep cave sprawled out in front of YuWon's eyes. This place was similar to the underground dungeon where he killed the parasite dragon. This was the boss room. In order to meet the true boss, there were a few hurdles he had to get past first. Various monsters appeared out of the cave. Acid snakes, land eels, lizard men, orc warriors, and goblin warriors. YuWon had to find the boss to clear the trial. The monsters started preparing defenses to stop the participants. The goblin warriors and orc warriors raised their shields, strengthening their defensive formation. The lizard men poked out their swords and spears through the openings between the shields. These monsters were like a well-trained army. On the floor, a long, thin snake slithered around. "Wow! What's all this? There's a ton of them." Hargan and his companions that came in after YuWon looked at the monsters blocking their path with fascination. They didn't look all that worried because, to them, an army of monsters of this caliber wasn't much of an obstacle. Every single one of them was the dark horse of this tutorial. In order to meet the boss, there are a few things that needs to be done. YuWon thought. Armed orcs and goblins, acid snakes and lizard men. Hostile monsters that couldn't cohabitate together were all staring down at YuWon. This was something that normally would have been impossible, but on this island, it wasn't. That guy is easily capable of this kind of control. There were at least a few hundred monsters just within his sight. This was a scale that should have been impossible for any one man to handle because it was never intended for anyone to attempt alone. The boss is in room number 3, YuWon thought to himself. YuWon started walking toward the monster's shield formation, thinking, I need to break through as fast as possible. A crimson mana pulsated from YuWon's sword. Extreme heat and a razor-sharp aura enveloped him. YuWon combined colossal fire with an arcane sword to form a combination skill. Finally getting the opportunity to see YuWon's skills, Hargen's companion stood by and observed him, despite all the CP that was laid out before them. Do we finally get to see him in action? I wonder how strong he is. The captain is already a monster. Yet he's ranked even higher than the captain. I wonder if he only has a lot of CP, or maybe he is actually that powerful. I can finally verify it with my own eyes. Even Hargen, who was always the first to charge into battle, crossed his arms and watched YuWon go forth as if signaling YuWon to go and do his thing. Let's see what you have, Kim YuWon. Hargen thought while looking at YuWon. He continued to walk closer and closer to the monsters. There was a heavy tension in the air. He looked like he was taking slow steps, but the gap between YuWon and the monsters closed quickly. It had only been a few seconds. After taking a few steps in a flash, did he disappear? Where did he go? The gang lost sight of YuWon. The only one who managed to follow YuWon's movements was Hargen. A huge fiery storm appeared over the heads of the monsters. After disappearing, YuWon landed on top of the monsters' heads. He was covered in raging colossal fire. What in the world? Hyun mumbled in shock. The crimson arcane sword started flying between the orcs, goblins, and lizard men. The monsters cried out in pain as a crimson storm brewing around them. The fiery heat burned their flesh, and every time the sword flashed, multiple heads dropped. And in just a few seconds, a pathway was created between the orcs and goblins that were blocking the way. In an instant, YuWon had penetrated the monster's defenses and committed a slaughter with just a single sword. He's even more of a monster than the captain. Mumbling to himself, Hyun looked to the side in fear. Luckily, Hargen didn't seem to mind Hyun's comment about him. Instead, he was smiling with extreme excitement. I knew it. Electricity started gathering around Hargen's fists. He could no longer just stand by and watch. The electricity in his fists let out an explosive sound, and Hargen took a step forward. Then, just like YuWon, Hargen disappeared in an instant. A pile of spears came towards Hargen. The orc shields and spears broke into pieces, and the acid snakes that littered the floor were torn to shreds. It was the power of Hargen's electric attacks. But just as he was busy defending the spears, a spray of acid came flying toward him. When he was about to be hit, a sword slash blocked the acidic rain. It was Kim YuWon, who intercepted the attack for Hargen. Looking at both of them fight the monsters, the rest of Hargen's group charged toward the monsters. The real hunt had started. Like, we aren't even needed, are we? But that doesn't mean we should just stand around and watch. If you don't do anything, you fall behind. That was the unchanging rule of the new world that they'd experienced since the first tutorial. There really isn't anything for us to do, huh? It appears so. Hargen's teammates passed through the pathway the two of them had created. There were some traps that weren't destroyed, but they weren't so weak as to get caught in them. Yolchun sheathed her dual swords, and the elf siblings prepped their spirits and magic respectively. Illader and Paladin stopped the poison that was raining down with fire and water. Sungyun started charging up his mana blast. Any large obstacles that blocked their path were instantly blown up by Sungyun. YuWon glanced back at the guys following behind him and nodded his head. At least they're skilled enough to not be a hindrance. With the exception of Hargan, YuWon had actually doubted their skills. He was worried they might have ended up holding him back. Well, that wasn't exactly right, since YuWon had no intention of helping any of them, even if their lives were in peril. He didn't have the luxury to intervene and help out every person he passed by. What YuWon was actually worried about was that they might accidentally get caught up in his business and die. I think it's that way. With an impatient personality, Hargan was the one furthest ahead. That's all for today. If you like the next part of this manhwa, just comment below. Thanks for watching, and please don't forget to like, subscribe and comment for getting epic content on this channel. See you next time.